Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Um,
Yes. Go ahead.
yeah. Hi. Sorry for the delays. So good afternoon, all of you, and thank you for joining us today. We warmly welcome you to our first panel of the South Asia Dialogue series, Barriers and Possibilities for Women in Politics in South Asia. I'm Shruti Sana and I head advocacy at Netri Foundation. Netri Foundation was established in 2019 with an aim to bolster quality representation, leadership, and participation of women in politics at all levels in India. We do this through training and capacity building of women, primarily in the grassroots, and by attempting to make women's electoral campaigns data and issue driven. The year is 2020, and according to the latest figures by the UN, only around 7% women serve as heads of states, and about 25% women, 25% of the decision making ministerial positions are held by women across the globe. While acknowledging the nuances of intersectionality and difference, we also believe that some challenges and barriers that women face emerge from common sources, and it is paramount to build transnational solidarity networks to support each other through these commonalities and differences. So, with this in mind, Netri Foundation has undertaken research to identify the barriers to women's political representation and participation in the demography of South Asia, which is to say Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, and India, and look at the existing legal and legislative frameworks, gaps, and necessary interventions to address these gaps in all 8 nations and for South Asia as a whole. So, to make our research more holistic, we are in consultation with experts from these nations, and the South Asia Dialogue is one effort to that end. So, we are joined today by two panelists. We're to be joined by a third panelist, Dr. Sonam Chuki from Bhutan, but she's facing some technical glitches, so she will be joining us in the evening panel. So, we have with us now Ms. Rai Baltazar from Sri Lanka and Ms. Kanchi Agarwal from India. So, Rai Balthazar is the convener and steering committee member of Women's Voice in Politics Sri Lanka. The platform seeks to create spaces for women who are engaged and interested in politics and facilitate discussions on policies using the gender lens and building solidarity among the community. She is a social activist who uses her 15-year media background to talk about advocacy and the role of active citizenship. Kanchi Agarwal is the founder of Netri Foundation and an ex-LAMP fellow. She has worked with several MPs. She's a policy researcher and a political strategist. Kanchi is a feminist who works at the intersection of gender, society, policy, and politics. So with that, we start our session. So what's very unique about both Sri Lanka and India is this one watershed moment where both the nations around the same time in the 1960s elected the first women prime ministers or premiers of the world. So, we had Ms. Bandaranaike from Sri Lanka and we had Indira Gandhi from India. So, my first question to both our panelists, and we can start with Rai, is what according to you, if you had to give us a snapshot, been the journey for women's leadership and women's political representation in your nations ever since that watershed moment and to
Okay,
now?
well, all right. Well, thank you very much, Shruti, for that kind introduction. And it's wonderful to be able to be here on this panel. So I'll start off with saying hello and thank you for having me. In terms of, sadly, this is always the question we get asked first. So I start on a slightly more sour note as a result of it. We as Sri Lankans are very proud. Every time anyone talks about women's representation, we very proudly talk about the fact that we are the first in the world to have appointed a prime minister who was a woman, and subsequently in 1994, Sirima Bandaranaike's daughter, Chandrika Bandaranaike, also she was the nation's first female president. So there is much pride in being able to say it, but as I started off, I said a little bit of a sour note, because to be honest, nothing has changed drastically since 1960. I mean, the statistics are quite shocking. We're going in for a parliamentary election in less than 2 weeks, in the first week of August. Currently, up to the run up to now, in our last parliament, the last 5 years, we had only 5.3% of women representing us in parliament. And I think in terms of like statistics, it gets even worse. For those of us who are younger and want to be represented, there was only one woman below the age of 40 in parliament. And that is at the top tier. And if you look at it from provincial council, again, there isn't much representation. I think the biggest change, however, did take place with local government. 2 years ago, we managed to pass legislation which meant that we have 25%, there was a quota system introduced, and at local government level, there were, we had a larger representation of women after many years of lobbying. This happened. So 25% at local government level, which is honestly one of, the few positives we can talk about. But in terms of a snapshot, up until 2018, it was quite a bit of a slow process, and it still is. If you look at, parliamentary elections and representing women in parliament. So 225 is the number we have in parliament, and we had less than 11 women, 12 to start off with, and then 11 by the end of it.
Thank you so much. We can now move to Kanchi.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction and for agreeing to moderate this panel, Shruti. Thank you so much. And Rai, thank you for being here with us. I really appreciate you taking time out. And given that the elections are in 2 weeks, I'm sure that there is a lot of, enthusiasm, and, there is a lot of preparations that are going on in Sri Lanka, and also during the COVID times, right? So elections are supposed to or expected to change the way we look at it post this COVID scenario. But before I give in my answer, I'm going to start in one of the polls that I have for people here. So you can, all the participants, I request you to, just give in your answer for this poll. So this question is like, what do you think, which according to you are the biggest barriers to women's political participation? And there are multiple choices. So I just ask you all to just take a couple of seconds to. Interesting. When all of you are done, I think 17 of you have voted. I request the rest of you to also just spare a couple of seconds to choose the answer. There is no right answer, actually. So okay, 76% of you have voted. So I request the last few remaining to just. Okay. If nobody else is going to go in for voting, I'm going to end the poll in about 2 seconds, no, 5 seconds. Okay. Okay, let's end the poll. And I'm going to share the results with you. Are you able to see the results? Just give me a thumbs up in the chat box, or yeah, if you're able to see the results, right? So now this is super interesting. Why? And that's why I said that there is no right answer with respect to the biggest barrier. But yes, in today's report, we are calling it money, muscle, and misogyny. The three common barriers that we have identified in this report, in this research. It was primarily a secondary research, and just to have all the voices heard, we have organized this consultation with people like Rai and Dr. Chuki, who, as I said, and as we mentioned, she'll be joining us later. The interesting bit is that I find it very, very surprising that we still believe that women lack interest in politics. 32% of us voted in favor of that one option. I still find it very, very surprising, but we also have 20 percentage vote for lack of role models. And this is where I come in to talk about, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, because she comes in as an example who has been one person we can always refer to, and we keep referring to her in nostalgia when we talk about women in politics in India. But there has been a gradual decline in the way we started viewing women in politics, and the way the newer or the younger generation got very limited options to look up to a woman and say, oh, she's my prime minister. uh, so now that is something that we are very, very that is very paradoxal about the whole South Asian region. As the question rightly was posed to both me and Rai, that we are the two nations which had these very, very strong female headed countries back in the 60s, and we still see the popularization of women in politics is so much, the narrative is overtaken by the West. Recently, Miss Marin was elected as a 34-year-old female head of state in Finland. And there was such a jumbo around it, and why not, like, why not? But we also see that there is not such not such a news coverage when it comes about South Asia. And South Asia, with respect to regions, it comes also in the lowest second. It is when you start ranking it, it is second from the bottom, which means that we are missing the point somehow. We are living in these two paradoxes, and one of the reasons I may say is that the elitism in politics is something that has dominated politics in South Asia a lot more. Now, this elitism is related to dynasty, it is related to money, and it is related to this masculine idea of politics. That makes politics in India and politics in South Asia, I can speak at least for India, it makes it super elite. It makes it very aspirational, and the common man is always detached from the common man or woman is very detached from the idea of going into politics. And I'm still surprised, as I said, that we think that women are not interested in politics. We can make it. We can say that it might be a result of lacking role models in the current time and age, that women are not shown this as an option, or we are not educated about this option so much. Instead of saying that women are not interested, because of course we are, and that's why we are sitting here. One more interesting thing that I'll just share one of the data points with you and tell you that what is the state of the art of Indian elections in 1957, right? One of the second elections, there were 45 female contestants. In 2014, there were 668. Okay, in 1957, there were 1,474 male contestants, and in the 16th Lok Sabha, which was formed after 2014 election, there were 7,578 men. So you see this disproportionately high rise in the number of males that have contested over the years, whereas when it comes to women, it is only a marginal increase, and we still see only 668 women contesting in comparison to 7,000 men in the fray. So, and this is obnoxious. This is completely, like, this is a betrayal of the promise of democracy. And that's where I'll end my remarks, and we can keep referring back to the poll that we just did. Keep it in the memory that you have. Thank you so much for this question.
Thank you so much, Rai and Kanchi. And there's good news. we have been joined by Dr. Chuki. She's been able to join us now. So I will just quickly go and introduce her and take it from there. So Dr. Sonam Chuki has a PhD in Gender and Politics from Queensland University of Technology, Australia, and Masters in Development and International Relations from Aalborg University, Denmark. She has taught gender and development studies as well as management at Royal Institute of Management in Thimphu for 20 years now. Currently, she is a curriculum developer in history and civics education at the Royal Education Council in Paro. So, welcome aboard, ma'am. This is a very good time because our next question is actually for you. We just spoke about the unique watershed moment for India and Sri Lanka and the journey thereafter. Bhutan too has had a very unique transition. Like Bhutan transitioned from a hereditary monarchy to a democratic constitutional monarchy now. And we want to know how that journey has been in terms of for women and for women leaders and women's representation in particular in politics. And yeah, so if you could start with that.
Hello, everyone. First of all, my deep apologies to all the ladies for the tech glitch here in the Himalayas. We had power supply cut, and as a result, the whole thing went out at the nick of the hour. So my apologies. But I'm here again, so good to connect with all of you. I'm sorry, I also could not participate very well with the polls, so I tried to tick with a very slow net here. Okay, your question, such a big question, and I do not know whether I'll be able to answer directly. Yeah, so yes, as you rightly said, ours is a young democracy. We're just 12 years old, so not yet a teenager, still a child, learning from your parents, which is the consolidated advanced democracies around the world, including neighboring India, the world's largest democracy. So the transition from monarchy to democracy has been both positive and negative in terms of women's participation as leaders in the parliament. Positive because for the first time, ordinary women like you and me, women whose names were never heard about before, were talked about. And some of these women are most common girls, ladies who actually come from really rural background in remote parts of Bhutan, who are from low middle class families. But because of their own educational attainment, one of the requirements is we needed to have the best and the bright in the parliament. So one of the requirement was a university degree to be a politician, a political candidate, so to speak. Also, young but the women voters were very important. They became so important that people at least included women voters in actually politics. You also had in the first democratic elections, women and youth wing, so to speak, for both the contesting parties, People's Democratic Party and Bhutan Harmonist Party, the two parties. They had women and youth wing, and both the president's wives were extensively involved in really garnering the votes of women, including ordinary women voters. So positive. Not very positive challenges there because politics became exclusively male domain, so to speak, because we started modern development, so to speak, on the Western model in early 60s. Then not many women and girls went to school. So then they participated in development activities really late as compared to our men colleagues. So therefore, then there were capable women who were naturally driven with natural skills, leadership skills, and aptitude, but they had no university degree, the paper. So as a result, they were excluded in, really contesting as leaders and to be a representative in the parliament. So that was the offside of democracy. So yeah, that'd be my quick answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anusha. Once
Sorry, Shruti, I think you muted yourself.
I'm saying Anusha is going to take over now. By the way, I did not introduce Anusha. Anusha is a lawyer in her own right and a researcher with Nepal Foundation. So Anusha will, and she's my co-moderator, so she'll be taking over now.
Thank
Thank you, Shruti.
you.
And
Thank you, Shruti.
thank you, Dr. Chuki, for joining us. You've mentioned, you've given us a brief idea of, Bhutan's journey in its transition from monarchy to democracy. It's very unique. Despite being a young democracy, it has shown remarkable maturity in the way it has carried out its democratic processes like elections. Election being an integral part of any democracy, we would like to understand from you the role of election commission in Bhutan specifically with respect to campaign finance, because we've seen that over the years it has produced the expenditure accounts of the political parties, the amount of state expenditure procured by the parties, and for what all categories they were spent. And we feel like this is a very welcome measure that most countries can learn to curb the problem of corruption. So we would like to hear from you, Doctor, on these points.
Thank you very much. This is a very important question. In your polls as well, one of the parameter was money in big politics, right? Yes, as you say, the common English saying, money talks and bullshit walks. If I may use this common, common saying, though it may not be elegant to say this, you see. Yeah, money does talk in politics. Um, uh, my research and also the popular media stories, as well as the empirical observation in the discourse, is that women were much ethical as compared to men. So they really stuck on to what was provided by the state. By the way, as you rightly pointed out in your research also, we have funding from the state. The Election Commission of Bhutan gives out money, yeah, to all the political candidates in both the National Assembly elections and National Council elections. So because we wanted to avoid the mistakes of the other neighboring countries of corruption, political corruption in terms of getting money, including the business interests. We want to avoid that. So as a result, the political candidates are not allowed to collect donations from big industries. Yeah. So as a result, this is a check and check. However, there were stories of political corruption where people were bribed, despite the strict vigilance of Election Commission and of course the national observers. And the were also present. So those were curbed, but then yet there were a lot of issues, about money being involved. But here again, as I was saying early on, women political candidates, I think they really stuck on to what was given. In fact, they worked extra hard. If you look at Bhutan, not just money, but along with money, we also have geographical barrier. Because this little country is also a country with all from mountainous country, where if you want to really garner votes of rural voters, the majority of a population live, you have to walk, endless walking, really traversing the Himalayas from alpine zone to subtropical. So it is such a tremendous, physically exhausting task, uphill task for women. And you also have party workers who are mostly men, and here's a women candidate trying to go with, try to actually be herself in this male ambience with party supporters, party leaders, funders. So despite that, they're able to rise above this corruption. And I'm really proud as a woman. In fact, in the last election in 2018 November, the former chairperson of Anti-Corruption Commission of Bhutan, Dashonetin Zangmo, as rightly mentioned, she returned the money unspent, which was 97,000 neutrum to the election commission, including chetram, which is like a paisa, to the election commission of Bhutan, which was never done by any man, And so likewise, there are other women whose ethics really show corruption at all. and whatever they could garner, it was basically. I'm sorry, the internet is unstable. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, I'm sorry, internet is unstable. So whatever they could garner is basically from their savings, their family support. And family support in here is very important, including your father, your brothers, in the patriarchal, including your uncles, your aunts, your siblings, everybody cutting across. This is also a country where kith and kin relationship is so strong. And in here, women being able to really uh, convince everybody in a family is a big issue. So now, if you also look at stories of each women candidate, it's basically their husband, their father, their brothers supporting them, not just with actually emotionally, but also financially. Yeah. So that's a story, and to that extent, so far the trend's been really good. And these women, in the first election itself, these women in ethics and values, they were the trendsetters and trailblazers. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chuki. That was very inspiring and insightful also. I think all the South Asian countries have a lot to learn from these best practices. So thank you for that. Now that we've seen one of the most important best practices, I would like to shift our glance, our attention to India. During last year's Lok Sabha elections, India recorded an all-time high of rupees 60,000 crores as its election expenditures, with the winning party BJP accounting for almost 45% of the total expenditure. So now I would like to hear from Kangshi as to what are the policy changes or interventions that you would recommend to tackle, the problem of uh, too much spending, corruption, and money power that acts as a very strong barrier to women and people coming from different marginalized communities.
Thank you so much,
Kangshi.
Anusha. Can you all hear me very clearly, though? That's my first question. I think there
Perfect,
was
we can
some.
hear you.
Thank you so much. Um, So instead of going to the recommendations, because there are great experts who have written about, electoral laws and reforms in electoral campaign finance laws, I would try to magnify, this barrier that you've presented. I would try to present the magnanimity of that barrier here, in front of the audience that is attending it. We have to understand that in terms of election spending in India, uh, it is completely extremely opaque. Okay, it is. So there were electoral reforms as they were promised to a democracy like India in 2017, but rather they have made the process even the more opaque with the introduction of electoral bonds. I'll come to that in a minute, but before that, let's look at what is the role of the election commission, because election commission in India, for example, does not have enough enforcement powers. Okay, for instance, it cannot cancel the candidature of who are misreporting personal wealth. And there is a very classic case of one of the ruling party's MPs who had managed to hide his one of the biggest companies that he owns from his affidavit, from his election affidavit. And there is an a regulatory loophole that he used to his advantage, and you really can't hold him accountable at this point. It was a big noise that was made around it, but what eventually happens is something that we really don't know. Then if you have to look at the party audits, like external party audits also, parties don't really tell you the actual spending, and then there are mechanisms that help parties not to disclose the actual spending. In the recent past also, the rise of self-financing candidates has been on a great rise, actually. I should say that between 2004 and 2014, the number of crorpatis in Lok Sabha, the Lok Sabha MPs, increased from 30% to 82%. And now just to imagine again the ridiculous amount of money that is spent in India with respect to these campaigns. And why? because there is an underlying sentiment that you have to please your voters with freebies, with bribes for them to come and vote. However, a lot of scholars recently have said that there might not be a directly proportional relationship with how much you have given to the voters. They have definitely voted you in power. But then there is also evidence that in the last general elections there were 21,000 candidates. Okay, 21,000 candidates across India, of which the 20% wealthiest candidates were 20 times more likely to win the election than the 20% of the poorest candidates, right? So we do see that money has a great role. And also why then there is why the rise of the self-financed candidates, because businesses or corporates who do donations now through shell companies, now through parties, parties were not allowed to get foreign funding before the electoral reforms of 2017, but now they are allowed to. That's another glitch that has been introduced. Then electoral bonds have been, so the idea of electoral bonds is that you can go and buy a bond from the bank, from the State Bank of India, and that money goes to the party. But it is completely anonymous now, and
Exactly.
you don't have to tell. Nobody has to tell how much money was donated. Pehle, it was like previously, it used to be 7.5% of the net worth that used to go of a corporate. That was the upper cap, 75%, 7.5% of the net profit, I think, not even net worth, was allowed to be donated. But now that capping has been removed. And why businesses now don't campaign and finance individuals? Because they have an incentive to finance parties. Now you see that if I were to get financed by a certain corporate, they will be like, I will not give it to you, I will give it to the party. Okay. Why? Because in India, anti-defection laws makes it even tougher for me to be a sole decision maker. So the individual's agency within the party, the individual's agency even within the parliament, despite the party, is very low. So now corporates feel like giving more money to the party, and these parties, because they are, all parties, despite ideologies, are extremely misogynistic. So they do not field women candidates, and their proportion of funding do not go to women candidates. And hence it just becomes a vicious cycle that women do not get access to the campaign finance that comes to the parties. It's not that Indian election has less money, it's just that it doesn't go to the women. So that was my remark, and I will keep it short on those lines, and I would like Varai to speak more about this or something else.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kanshi. What you said is very true. And we are still grappling with that situation. So, in that context, I would like to hear from Rai on the situation in Sri Lanka, because one of the recent changes that has been made to elections is the closed list policy. Even though this is a very welcome measure in terms of increasing the quality of the candidature in politics, this has in fact created additional barriers to women in politics for whom these were the only forms of entry into politics. So, we would like to hear from you about the dynasty politics, the closed list, and other dynamics involved with respect to representation of women in politics in Sri Lanka. Over to you, Viray.
Thank you, Anusha. So, yeah, the dynastic politics is still very prevalent, and I'm so glad that Dr. Chuki also mentioned, and again, Kanchi also talked about how it works with the support of of family members. Here, I think we've been throwing the word nepotism around a fair amount in the last few years. In fact, this election, the general election we're just about to head into, there were statistics that were released last week. Approximately 70%. Not 70%, but 70 numbers of the people in parliament are related to somebody else in parliament. So, I mean, it shows you how very compact that system almost is, right? And also, I just want to add on to something that Kanchi also said about how. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought because I wrote down so many things while discussing this, because I was like, okay, I have something to say to that. But I just like to go back to talking about campaign financing also. We had approximately, again, we don't have laws that prohibit or anything in place that really make sure that we have a proper system in place to take care of campaign financing, to overlook it, and to make sure that people stay within this frame. At the last election, which was the presidential election, it was approximately 3,108 million in terms of that Sri Lankan rupees that was spent. And that was a statistic that was given by the Center for Monitoring Election Violence. And this was spent by the 5 larger mainstream parties, of which we must also say that one of the parties spent more than 50% of that amount of money. So that's a huge amount. So there are no caps. There are no laws that prohibit people from taking money from whomever they please. But the point that I think I lost my train of thought, but I want to come back to, is about how women are there for how does the money come across to women, or how does it stream down to them? And in reality, a lot of people don't think women will win. So you only want to put your money down on a winning horse, so to speak. Again, not very elegant words, but that's how people see it. You want to bet on the winning horse, and there isn't a lot of support for the women in general, and that's a cultural thing. It's a social thing. I thought it was very interesting when we did that poll. I wrote most of that down simply because I thought that was all prevalent here in Sri Lanka also. So you don't believe that women will do well at an election, and that they can. And even at this election, in fact, the general election, I don't think we have more than 100 candidates around the island who are canvassing and looking to go into mainstream politics. Again, I think of the 2 or 3 larger parties, again, we've done kind of a calculation, and I don't think there are more than 30 or 40 perhaps in total from the mainstream parties, and that's quite concerning, because we've been talking about women's representation. It always comes up. There are so many panel discussions. There are so many people working towards trying to change that. But at the point that these nomination list gets made, there is so much misogyny from within the parties that's where it stops. And campaign financing is a huge issue for women. It's a huge barrier. And I think it's a barrier that a lot of people are trying to overcome now. There are various interest groups, NGOs, who are looking in to try to find solutions. But I think that is a real area that's a real problematic area where we haven't been able to deal with the issues of campaign financing, simply because we don't have a larger structure that deals with it either. So on this microstructure, we're not going to be able to deal with it anyway.
Anisha, it will permit. Thank you, Rai, for that. Thank you for that bringing winnability, right? So when Rai mentions that women are thought to be unwinnable, they will put their money on the winnable horse. I would like to share similar arguments given in India against putting women in the parties, against giving tickets to women in parties. I would like to mention that the winning streak, as I gave you some figures from 1957 to 2014 in terms of how many women have contested. But if you look at the winning streak, women candidates are always more winnable than their male counterparts, and we have election commission data for that. Okay, so in India in 1957, like out of all the contestants, the male contestants, 32% was the winnability. 32% of them, the final winning. How do you say? The final winning proportion was 32%. But however, with females, it was 48%. And now that the number of candidates are increasing, but the seats in the parliament remain more or less constrained. It has increased since 1957, but it is not too much. Right now, also in 2014, 6% was the winnability of a male counterpart versus 9% was the winnability of a female counterpart. It is being calculated just by how many women came into the fray. So, for example, 668 women came into the fray, 61 of them won. And if 7,500 close to men came into the fray, 482 of them won. So if you'll just divide these percentages, you'll get that winnability of women is still higher. And we still keep, making an argument which is not even evidence-backed, that women are not winnable, women are not interested in politics, and, give them the tickets that you're definitely going to lose. Another point on dynasty, and I'll just conclude on that. thank God for dynasty to some extent in India. Otherwise, we wouldn't have even seen the number of women we have seen in the parliament. Like one, we want to counter it effectively with more women who do not come from familial ties to come into politics. But whatever you have seen so far, we should acknowledge dynasty to some extent. And this is an assumption that dynastic women are less qualified than all the other candidates. They are token, they are figureheads, and we keep discrediting them for all the work that they do. We need to acknowledge that some women in India and maybe in other South Asian countries have come through dynasty. But then we also have to evaluate that the work that they did after they came in. So we have to look at the governance aspect as well. Sometimes, yes, the assumptions hold true, but we cannot generalize this because this is much more of a non-homogeneous group of people who come into politics through dynasty. And another assumption goes that upper caste women and class privilege, is predominant in dynasty, which is also not the case, because in India, we see that women who come from rather minorities get more benefit of being from dynasty. Otherwise, they would have not gotten even the chance that they have gotten. So we have to look at it in a more complex manner and can't say dynasty is bad and dynasty is good. We have to evaluate all these aspects of women's participation and its ties to dynasty in politics.
Absolutely. Point well taken, Kamshi. Thank you for sharing that with us. I think similar was the case with Bhutan also. Last year's elections, out of 11 women candidates, 7 of them won seats. So I think statistics actually talk a different information. One other important barrier, since we are running short of time, is about violence, and we have to address this. So over to Shruti. She'll be talking to the panelists to ask more detailed questions about the barriers women face through different manifestations of violence. Over to you, Shruti.
So yeah, taking on the barrier of violence, there's a very specific kind of violence that happens against women who are in power and who are fighting elections. And while violence can exist in various forms. It can be something like cyberbullying, but it can also be something like sidelining or just direct forms of violence. And there's of course a need to recognize that, but there's also need to recognize this very specific kind of violence and not generalize it as, say, domestic violence and or just violence in general, because this is a very specific kind of violence. I would like your comments on that. My first question would be to all three panelists on the different forms of violence against women fighting for like elections, fighting in elections and fighting and in power as well, the different forms of violence that are manifested in your respective countries, and also recommendations to sort of, and also recommendations, but also maybe steps that have already been taken by civil society or other organizations to sort of fight this. So over to Dr. Ki, and then we can go to Rai, and then we can go to Kanchi.
Thank you, Shruti. Very important question. In here, our experience in Bhutan is that the public space violence, if I may use this word, in terms of the patriarchal constructions. For instance, in the first democratic elections after the government was formed and before the first parliament really met, even the media talked about what political candidates are going to do, how they're going to actually address the promises that they made during elections. And for this young women candidates who have actually won the elections because of their own ability and the sincerity and integrity, the media, the language that they use, I do not know whether to call it violence, but really demeaning language in terms of degrading women's ability. So the media did stories on what kind of clothes women are going to buy, what kind of makeup they're going to wear, how they want to look in the first parliamentary session. And it's not about substance they're going to present and bring in the dialogue, but really demeaning, reducing their own ability to mere things like makeup and clothes. And the clothes, what kind of expensive clothes they're going to buy. So I thought in a public space, you're doing dishonor to women. That's what the other thing is also the language, because in the parliament, you just as you in India, you'll use Hindi language, right? The official language. In Bhutan, in our parliament, we use official Zonka. Not many women were, because women didn't take on the public space leadership in the higher echelons even before they entered politics in other areas in bureaucracy. So therefore, the vocab in terms of the large vocab ability, easy smooth flow of the tongue, etc., were limited. So therefore, you also had people really magnifying the use of their words, you see, demeaning the position, the angle that they've taken, instead of really looking at the substance and sincerity and kind of honesty that they're bringing in to address issues in parliament. So therefore, again, I thought it's emotional violence. And there was a case where the speaker of the parliament actually did not know a member of women parliament in one of the constituency. And then, of course, he made this racist remark saying that, oh, wait, who is this woman from that particular woman located in that particular desk, you see? So that sort of a language, I thought it's so important that the women ourselves, we should be able to set this trend. So this actually makes me recall, even in a mature democracy such as Australia, Australia's first woman prime minister, Honorable Julia Gillard, she had to give this misogynist speech to actually say that she's totally against this misogyny. She won't tolerate use misogynistic language. So even a mature democracy had to face that. So Bhutan, being the first youngest democracy in the world, the first set of the women leaders in the parliament, they had their own huddles. The next bit is, of course, young. There are one of a young, couple of young women were young in their reproductive age. So therefore, then when they became pregnant, so when they couldn't travel to their constituency, it's walking literally across the mountains, scattered settlement, door to door. She had to really literally gather her party workers, her supporters to a particular place and, actually conduct a meeting. But then, of course, again, the use of language in terms of portraying that, how pregnancy is portrayed. I think this is also a violence. Women, we are triply burdened: reproductive burden, productive burden, leadership burden. So in here you have, and no other women in power would face that, you see, than an elected woman who's actually made fun of and poked fun of because being a woman. If it's a counterpart, your man, the man was married, his wife had a baby at home and nobody talked about it. It was okay, a normal thing. You see, that sort of language use challenges. And therefore, then women, the way you had to really carve your niche out and, of course, overcome all this huddle, I think it'll go a long way. Long way, not just here in South Asia, but even beyond South Asia, even mature democracy. Yeah, thank you. I'll leave it to that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chuki. It's very enlightening. And of course, the fact that the connection between both mental health and women's leadership is one that is yet to be made, especially in terms of abuse, that is verbal harassment or mental harassment. And to recognize that as a form of violence is still a task that we as nations have to do. But yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. Over to Rai now.
Yeah, thanks, Shruti, for posing that question. And I think for me, especially in the run-up to this election, this is all we've been discussing. As the group that we have, Women's Voice in Politics, is basically a space that we hold for women who are predominantly council members, but women on the political spectrum. So they are of they have different backgrounds, they come from different parties. And from our group alone, we have 7 of them who are running for the general election. So we've been in touch with them, we've been in contact, and a lot of what we're seeing on social media is quite horrific. It really is very disheartening, for all of us, because we want to be able to hold fort and to kind of be the safety net for these women. But the problem is so huge that we are dealing with this massive cultural and social problem of patriarchy, of misogyny, of casual chauvinism. I mean, it is such a massive prevalent problem for us in everything that we do. And I mean, the examples, we have many, but it's very disheartening. And I can only imagine, and I think a lot of the women we see on whenever they go on talk shows or whenever they have these kind of public spaces, if you read through the FB comments alone, the social media comments, I mean, they're just downright scary. You know, it's demeaning, it's degrading, and some of them come from just, you know, very legitimate profiles, and some of it also comes from other male politicians, and sometimes, unfortunately, it also comes from other female politicians, which is also a problem, because I think there's also, and this is something that I think I've spoken to some of you before, not in the context of this, but we often assume that having women in places of power will automatically translate to meaning that those women will then represent all of us as women. And that's not always the case. Very often there are women who are in those spaces who also perpetuate those patriarchal notions, who also talk of women in a very negative way, because that is the space that they hold within the party, and they can't compromise on that for the sake of their, you know, their seat or their view. So it becomes very problematic when other women talk of, you know, women who are running for an election in a very negative way. And it's something that, well, technically harassment, be it online or in whatever way, should be, we have the Elections Commission, and I know this time with this general election, they had put together a particular plan where you are able to take your grievances to the Election Commission and that they would resolve it. So if it's, for instance, a Facebook issue, they should be able to maybe take that off. You know, there have been fake posters made. There are, you know, just absolute misinformation, disinformation. There is just, on every level, there's just so many problems. And I was just looking through, we were just talking this morning, a few of us again this morning, about one particular candidate who, you know, she constantly gets talked about for her skin color. Because she's fairer skinned than others. It's always about how long your sari jacket sleeve is, or how deep it is, or did you see her? You know, we've got a mayor in Colombo, the capital of the country, who's been in politics for as long as I've been alive, and there are young male politicians who still refer to her as a beauty queen because that's the background she came from. So you have someone who's been in politics for like 30 years who still gets referred to as a beauty queen. We have a current parliamentarian, the only one who's below the age of 40, and still for all, every time something happens, she also came from a space in which, you know, she was also a beauty queen. She came, you know, she was a contestant in a beauty pageant, and to date, I mean, she's now, you know, expecting her third child and still in parliament and has been a part of active party politics, but they still, every time she says something that they don't like, they put up a picture of her in a swimsuit. And I think these are the problems, you know, of having to counter these every day. It's exhausting for the women. And I think the women that we've spoken to are always talking about how they have to also run their campaigns. But there's so much of work that goes into trying to counter these just very basic, absolutely disgusting, misogynist, things that go on. So I just want to leave you with that thought also. I don't think there's I think in terms of, there is no kind of state mechanism, because I don't think the state really understands the need for it. And I think that's only something, I mean, that's something that we as Women's Voice in Politics, and I think other groups are trying to kind of address. And I don't think there's anything that we can do in the short term to address that. That's something that has to happen by both the parties and also the women running, and it has to be a longer process of addressing those problems within the structures of parties and of the entire kind of system of governance.
Sure.
Thank you so much, Rai, and thank you for bringing in so many points from social media to how women from the entertainment or the beauty industry are treated. And especially with that, I mean, it resonates so much with what happens in India, and just how the women from the entertainment industry in India are looked down upon as just, oh, they're just beautiful women, so they should just keep shut and not have serious opinions, or cannot have serious opinions. So it's very complex. So I'll give it over to Kangshni now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shruti. Again, I am so intently listening to both our guest speakers today. because the question is also coming in the chat box that how is violence different for women even when even men face it. I would like to just go in the basic definition of how can we define violence against women in elections. Okay, so this kind of violence is gender-based violence that is directed primarily at women because of their aspirations to seek political office, their link to political activities, their political opinions, or even sometimes simply their commitment to vote. Now, this can be categorized. All what that has been said by both Dr. Chuki and Rai. It can be categorized into 5 categories. Okay, broadly, there is physical violence. You could go back to the case of what happened to Jayalalitha in the Legislative Assembly of her state back in the day. You should definitely look up that event if you do not know about that. There is sexual violence. There are threats and coercions. There is psychological violence, and there is economic violence. Okay, now this violence can be and specifically is motivated to uphold the gender norms in the society or the traditional female roles, and it can impact women in different or disproportionately harmful ways because it discourages them from then being politically active during an election or even thinking about political thoughts. Sometimes, and most times, I often talk to young girls and ask them if and when they engage in political opinions and debates online on their social media platforms. uh, this is one of the very important things, is how our physical spaces has also now seeped into our digital presence, and whatever was our physical experience that we used to go on the road and being mocked or being beat. So women are literally thrown dust at or filled at when they are on their campaign trail sometimes, because they try to show them the place of a woman. This is not your place. So that's why I said that this violence is specifically motivated by the inspiration or by the demented mentality that women should be kept in their places. And that is why it is different. The threats are also sometimes sexual in nature, which you do not see sometimes happening with men most of the time. So this is the way it manifests itself is also very different, and it is over the period of time that you keep on disregarding their work. It is a psychological violence, right? So that is to answer all sorts of questions. And in India, you see examples of mostly everything that I've talked about right now. There are women on the online spaces, but I want to actually mention one of the very inspiring campaigns run by NDI. Not the cost. Women are told that this is the cost you have to pay if you have to be in politics. If I go up to my parents and say I want to be in politics, they're like, and I have been, by the way, not by my parents, but I was sitting in a journalist office back in my hometown, and he said, "Kuch bhi hone ke liye tayar raho. Just be prepared if something happens to you, just because you're politically active." And this came. My mother was sitting with me in that office, okay, and we walked down and we were sitting in the car, and I just said one thing to my mother, Manika, be prepared to hear these things. People will say it, and it is okay for them to say it because that's how they have perceived the society, and that's how they look at it. But you should not be fearful, because my strength is in my family. If you will give me the confidence and everybody has to, then I gave her a philosophical speech around it. But honestly, it has happened to me, and I've seen it, just like just because I'm involved in this space, this came at me, and this will come at you, but this is not the cost. We have to tell women and other people that this is not the cost that you have to pay to be in politics.
Thank you so much, Kanchi. And on that point from that point, I take the point of solidarity to counter that. And here I come to one of this is our from our side. This is the concluding questions, and we'll then go on to participant questions for some time. But the final question from my side is to do with South Asia. So of course we acknowledge intersectionality, and we acknowledge difference and the nuances that brings. But do you see that there is feasibility in building a solidarity network for the women in politics of South Asia? Is that feasible? Is that possible? Can we do it? Is it even a good idea? So again, in that order, first from Dr. Chuki, and then we take it from there.
Very touching question, something very close to my heart. I think it is feasible, it's possible. Yeah. So why am I saying that? This, I think if we ourselves do not make moves, and if we ourselves are not proactive, then who will, you see? Because it's so important to really empathize with each other beyond our ethnicity, our geography, our territory, our religion, our languages, and all sorts of labels and references we have in South Asia for ourselves. After all, we are women, and we have the sisterhood. I think it's so important that we have the solidarity as sisters across South Asia, and therefore our common struggle and common causes and common hurdles that we need to overcome. Now, if you look at just this small discussion online, misogyny is a common thing. Looks like, see, violence against leaders, elected leaders, economic violence, cultural violence, psychological violence. We talked about this now, all common. We talk about India, we talk about Bhutan, we talk about Sri Lanka. The same. Our own struggles, gender division of labor, women's place in politics, how men question our own place is a common issue. So a lot of common issues on our plate, and it's so important that we build it. This is why I joined this group. When Anusha invited me and Kanchi invited me and Shruti, we had a lot of correspondence, exchange of email. I thought this is so important. You see, I'm not even a practitioner, I'm just a scholar, but I take great interest in this issue as academic, so that we talk about it, we network. I also network with local women politicians here in Bhutan, both at local government level and at parliamentary level, and try and support each other. So try to be very active so that we have these issues addressed. In fact, I'll tell a story. During the domestic prevention bill, before the bill was passed, there was in parliament, there was a politician who said, it's okay to beat up women, you see. So as soon as he said that, oh, there was a solidarity, unknown women coming together for a common struggle, women from civil society, from the academia, from the public service, from media. We all went together in the parliament with, of course, with the permission within the existing rule, and we said we want to dialogue with men. And in here, it's so important that we dialogue, because we need to be a harmonious society. It's not again. I think radical feminism will not work in South Asia. South Asia is too patriarchal. It's so deeply seated. So it's important that we also have, if feminist men, buy them, educate men at home. If you have boyfriends, lovers, husband, brothers, educate and buy them in, and then of course on our side, and have dialogue and have it addressed. My sense is that we're equal but different. So we need to be a harmonious society. Otherwise, we'll never win a struggle. So I'll leave it there. Yeah. But I'm with all of you in solidarity. Yeah, to Sri Lanka, to India, and of course our colleagues in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh. I think we have same stories. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chuki. We're equally happy to be collaborating with you, and thank you for the inspiring words. Moving on to Rai. For that, I'd also like to tell the participants to post their questions on the chat if they have any, so that we can take them after that. Over to you, Rai.
Yeah, thanks, Shruti. Actually, Dr. Chuki's answer was very wholesome, and it got me, feeling very good in here, because I also live in a very idealistic space, in which I believe solidarity can really change everything. It is a premise of why we came together for Women's Voice in Politics, because we are not traditionally a group that does capacity building. We are not, a traditional NGO. We're self-funded, we're a group of 9 women. And the purpose for us really is to try to change things. And we're very idealistic. We're all between the ages of 25 and 35. And the reason we hold that space is just for women to come together and to create solidarity. Our sole purpose is creating solidarity. And when I explained this, I remember when it was still like an idea, people said, oh no, they'll never come together. It's never going to happen. You're just being, really silly. You don't know how politics works. You're just, on the outside, civil society activists trying to change the political work. But now, over the last year, we've seen, we're still a baby organization also, we're a baby platform, but we've seen the ability to connect people. And yes, we will have our differences, and no, we're not always going to hold hands and, come together for everything. There are issues that we will certainly stand apart on, but the ability to listen, to empathize, and to influence is so strong. And if we can do that here, I don't see why we shouldn't be doing it across the globe, or at least in South Asia, because of our because of how much we have in common. I think for us to be able to learn from each other and build on those relationships, I can never see that as a negative. I think the more we speak to each other, the more we learn, and the more we learn, the more we're able to give back. And I think that is the strength of solidarity, and it is quite idealistic, but I choose to continue to be idealistic, and I choose to think that this is the way to change politics, especially for women. Just like Dr. Chuki said, the system is so patriarchal that there is no legislation, there are those definitely affirmative action things that will have an impact, but the way in which to really hold fort for all of us and to build this support system we want is through solidarity. So yes to South Asia, and yes to everywhere else in the world as well.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rai. I'm just going to launch the last poll before all our participants, feel that we are almost coming to the end of it, and I'll give the answer, but I'm just launching a poll for next 1 minute. This is a shorter poll. So please take time to just mark your answers. There you go. So the question is the one that you have heard most number of times. Oh, okay. Why is poll relaunch the poll? I'm sorry, it got closed. Yeah. Can you please mark it again? Sorry. That will end soon. Thank you. 9 if you have marked it. Okay. 63% voted. I want full, like, complete democracy here. Please, everybody on the participants list, please make your vote count. Okay, I'm gonna give like just 30 more seconds. Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna share the results. So nobody in this, I'm very, very happy and surprised that nobody said no. If there are people who are at the maybe, the 14%, they should also come in for our evening session because why we did this poll is because we just wanted to present to you the barriers and the possibilities today, right? But as you saw that there is so much that we can learn from our neighboring countries. That is where solidarity comes in, learning, in co-learning, in co-growth, right? We can grow with each other. There is no, and this is the growth of a one common group, which is women, right? It is not one versus the other. If we grow together, we can learn from each other, and to build solidarity over these barriers. Okay, sometimes we feel, oh my God, this Western world is doing so far and so greater than us. There is Jacinda Ardern, and a lot of my friends express their anxieties that we all want to shift to New Zealand. I was like, find your own Jacinda here. And I think not only me, a lot of advocates and civil rights activists and feminists in my circle said that find your own Jacinda. We don't lack women who are interested in politics. We don't lack women who are effective with their campaigning, with governance. Studies have shown that women do have a very pro-poor policies when they come into power. They govern differently, and it is only by electing them or putting them in the positions of power can we really see what they are capable of. You cannot make assumptions about women, right? And you cannot generalize it. So I think this solidarity that we have we have just begun to build with Bhutan and Sri Lanka and other countries, Afghanistan, Nepal, and all the other countries that we are still getting in touch with. I think it is very important to understand that all of us women, and India is such a multicultural land, right? We will find commonalities with all our neighbors, because in our country we say that at every 2 miles the language and the water changes, and people's conditioning changes and people's behavior pattern changes. So we have so much to learn and explore and experiment. So thank you for that, and I will give hold to my remarks there. I will just answer the two questions that have come in the chat box. One came to me that, Kankshi ma'am, how should the women in India ready themselves when they are about to participate in the election? Of course, they want to think about the upliftment of society, but what else then? Very good question, Jayapriya. Actually, Netri Foundation is established for the purpose of, capacity building of young women like yourself. Um, we do a lot of back end. So this research is something that we invested ourselves in during the lockdown. But our primary goal is to train women through modules. We have an elaborate program that we're designing. So please feel free to get in touch with us, and we will be happy to, tell you there are so many things that goes into the preparation of being a politician. And not only a woman, even a man needs to do that. Everybody needs to, be hyperactive and on their toes when they are getting into politics, especially electoral politics. And second question came in. My question is, do women really want to get into these misogynistic political parties? Can they really make a change being in the existing major parties, or should women choose to be independent candidates? Unfortunately, independent candidates in India, the winning streak is only 1% or even lower than that sometimes, right? There are only two independent women MPs in the current parliament right now. One I know is from Maharashtra, Navneet Rana. Again, so the idea here is that, and I was in a conversation, I got a chance to, attend a talk by T.R. Raghunandan sir. He and we at Netri were also toying with the idea that how can women emerge as voting blocks. Now, this is a great idea. And when Sir was mentioning, when Raghunandan Sir was also mentioning, I had questions regarding the intersectionality. Women is not a homogeneous group, and there will be intersectionalities. How will you address that? And women will have to be a part of these political parties. It's just that if they keep, if they even form a women party, then it becomes detached from the mainstream, and we don't want to do that. We want to gender mainstream women, and their presence in these mainstream parties is thought to bring change that we really expect to see. And women, yes, they will have to sometimes grow a thick skin, but Jayalalitha said, no, I'm the kind of person who feels a lot, and I will continue to feel more. You cannot stop me from feeling if I'm in politics. It's just that we have to put up that brave face, be empathetic, and set out to do what we are, set out to do. So that's where I will hold my comments again. Thank you so much. I give it over to the moderators.
We have some questions coming in. Kanshi, do we have time for questions?
Yes, I'll just we can extend if the participants are willing to stay back with us, and if Dr. Chuki and Rai are like expecting to stay back with us, then of course we can take a couple of questions. Please go ahead, ask them.
Okay. So we've gotten about 3 questions, new questions. One is, what is your opinion on prevailing cultural attitudes regarding the role of women in society? That's by Varsha. And I think that's a very broad question. So so we have 3 questions. We'll get the 3 panelists to answer each one of them. So I think, do you want to take that, Dr. Chuki?
Okay. So the first question, right?
Yeah.
What the thoughts on negative branding? Okay. The negative branding of women into. Okay. Yes, this is, I think this is, as I was saying again, going back to patriarchy. This is a deep-seated patriarchal construction of the years of socialized roles. I think when men and women are born, we're born with equal brains and equal abilities. So therefore, then it's just a socialization that's taken place, which is actually divided the gendered role of public-private divide. So I think it's so important also to change this. I think if you look at sociological construction, basically when humans evolved, it's from the hunter-gatherer perspective, where men went out to hunt in the public space and women stayed back to rear childbearing and rearing work. That is really that has really gone on to when humankind evolved, and even to this day, 21st century world, you also expect women the gender division of labor, which is pretty bad. So then this is why the brand, negative branding, when women come on to politics, so they, instead of appreciating young women leaders, you actually look at them, either degraded them as in Sri Lanka's case as beauty queen and not look beyond that, or if a woman is very strong politician, decisive, able to get things done, then you're seen as something ugly or bad or evil. I think which is a pretty bad brand. So we need to, in here, my own sense is that it's important to build better style of leadership, which is, as some of you already echoed, things like empathy, compassion, consciousness, honesty, professionalism, um, looking at big vision of the world. As His Holiness the Dalai Lama once said, the 21st century is a century of women, compassion associated with women. We need compassionate leaders. Even if you look at COVID-19 pandemic response, it is there was this interesting article where it said how women's humility actually saved the world. If you look at Chancellor Merkel or Jacinda Ardern, you're talking about, or Taiwanese Prime Minister. If you look at the Norway, if you look at if you look at Iceland, these are women who listen to the scientists, science informed, humble, empathetic, compassionate. They brought these traits in public leadership, conscience of the nation, and as a result, being able to lead the country. The misogyny in terms of super ego, such as if you look at America, this is where you failed. Your world's wealthiest nation, yet you failed your people in terms of not being able to save despite high technology and a lot of research and scientists available. If you look at COVID response, this is why I'm saying it's important to build again the better brand of women leaders, women politicians, feminism with positive glasses. And just because men are there, you don't have to imitate men. You look at your own role model. Your own mother can be a role model. In my case, my own mother, a simple farmer, she's my role model. She's taught me to be compassionate, to be empathetic, to be courageous, to be fearless, and to rise above the herd mentality and move in life. I think it's so important that you bring in your own energy and build within your own context and then move forward. And so therefore, let's build what can I say, empathetic South Asia brand women. You don't have to behave like men, masculine, arrogant, corrupt, and and not deliver goods and services, but self-serving. Let's be selfless and rise above that and truly compassionate. After all, we are mothers. We have motherly instincts, you see, and they can move. Yeah. So this is very important question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So to empathetic leadership. Rai, would you want to take over the question on the cultural barriers? What are the prominent cultural perception and barriers? If you could just very briefly answer that in Sri Lanka.
Sure.
In terms of, yeah.
Sorry, so I'm going to let you finish asking that.
Sorry?
No, I think you already finished. I realized that I had interrupted you, which is very rude of me. Sorry, Shruti.
Okay.
So yeah, I think I've kind of already touched on those barriers, and I think Dr. Chuki has already mentioned a lot of that already. So I don't want to be very repetitive, but in saying that, we are not too different in those cultural barriers either. It is still very much. I feel like we are still very far away from being able to resolve those problems, especially for women in politics, because even the women who are in active politics now are predominantly, again, coming from those dynastic backgrounds. And again, as Kangshki also very rightly mentioned, there's no need to discredit women who come in from those spaces. But the question then again is, are they really representing all of us? Are they representing the women who are tea pluckers in the central part of the island? Are they representing the women in the north who've been probably the worst affected by a 30-year civil war? So who is it who represents us? So these cultural barriers are so nuanced, and it changes, I think, with each kind of religious background, with each kind of racial background. So it's a lot to have to work with and to deal with. And I know a lot of people who are working and trying to change those cultural and social barriers have to address those minute details, because as again Kangshki mentioned, we are not a homogeneous group, and we can't, when we are also trying to resolve these problems, we can't go in assuming that all these women have the same problems. So the women in the north who are trying to engage in politics will have different issues to the women in the south. So we have to be able to also address all of those things as we go along.
Okay, thank you so much, Rai, again. And Kanshi, I think we can end with one question that is related to what Tanvi asked. So can you give us 3 things a young aspiring woman politician who joins a party which is essentially patriarchal in nature should remember?
Who's that question for?
For Kanshi, and that's where we're ending with that. So that's 3 pro tips.
3 tips that you have to remember when you go into politics.
Yeah, that's taking cue from a question from Tanvi, one of our participants.
Okay, 3 things you have to remember. 1, claim the public space. Claim that space. Okay. Do not sit silently in a corner. Do not be shunned when men do mansplaining with you. So claim that space. Okay. Second, create your own brand. As somebody asked that, this negative branding of, women who enter into politics, understand the power of media and social media so well that nobody else is able to set the narrative for you. You set the narrative for yourself. Okay. And we did one of our events last month, Who Gets the Limelight, where we have given recommendations on how media should present and report on women better, how journalists should understand women politicians. So that is something that you can definitely look up at. And the third thing is understand your politics, understand your aim better. Even when you're in a misogynistic space, let your work speak. When somebody's inhibiting you from working, create innovative ways to find your place with your work. I know it is like one of the most audacious things that you can do. Probably you will be able to do it, but if you do the first 2 things, your third thing might come through. So that is what I can gear up right now, but I'll be better prepared on this question from next time on. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think thank you so much. And with that, we come to the end of our first panel. Thank you so much, Rai. Thank you so much, Dr. Great having you. Thank you so much, Kanchi. She's from Netflix. She's one of us, so that's goes to her last. But thank you so much, Anita, for co-moderating. And thank you, everyone, for being a part and being so active and enthusiastic about it. And we look forward to seeing you in our next session at 6 p.m.
Shruti,
today.
if I may add just one last thing, if the participants would like to get an overview of the barriers and the report that we are doing, please go check out our overview of the report. The link is in the chat and it will direct you to our website. It will help you understand our conversation much better. So that's it from us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Namaste. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
ladies. So cheers to us.